Welcome to Locator Strategies with Playwright, presented by Applitools. Our speaker today is Renata Andrade. Renata is a software quality champion experienced in both small and large organizations in the US and internationally. She helps teams build the best strategy to practice quality in the easiest, fastest, and most reliable way possible. Driven by sharing knowledge and inspiring people through mentoring, lectures, and trainings in Portuguese and English.
Thank you very much, Pam. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I know we have people from all over the world, and I'm really happy to be here today. As we get warmed up, I would like to know where you're coming from. So if you want to post in the chat, I would be traveling around and it's going to be super fun. Let's see. We have people from Turkey, Portugal, Wyoming. That's so cool. London, Hungary, Mexico, hola. Slovenia, Brazil, woohoo. India, New York, Poland, Germany. That's amazing, everyone. Welcome. It's so nice to have you all here with me today. And now that you know a little bit about myself, I would like to know a little bit about yourself too. So I will have 4 polls, and we can start right now. I will invite you to answer what best describes your current role, please. I will guiding this webinar by how many people we have from each role, so it would be amazing to know your role nowadays. The poll is on the right side of this application, AirMeet, so you can find it there. And let's see the results. Okay, so far we have around 66% of people in the quality engineering role, 17% in quality engineering management, project manager a little bit, developers and others too. That's amazing. Very diverse team, and it's always great to have people from all the engineering team. 3 more polls to go. Can we take a look at the next one? Have you ever played with Playwright before? Yes or no? Let's see what we have here today. I will give a spoiler alert. I have played with Playwright before. Okay, let's see. Yes, amazing. We have more than 75% of people that have experience with Playwright, and some people that don't have. And don't worry, this talk will be for all of you. Thank you very much. One more question. Do you have experience coding with any automation framework? It can be unit tests, API tests, or any other maybe performance tests. You can vote if you do or do not have experience with any other automation framework, please. Personally, I have experience with Selenium. When I started probably 17 years ago, was the framework I have ever worked with. And obviously at the time, Selenium was the only framework existing. So maybe there were a few others, but that's the only largely available. Yes, so more than 94% of people have worked with any other automation framework. Thank you. And the last question, this is a very important question, okay? So think wisely what you're gonna answer here. Do you prefer tea or coffee? Let's see who is on my team and who is not on my team. And if you don't like any of them, it's totally fine too. Let's see. I prefer tea. So let's see the audience. Team coffee wins this time. More than 53% of the audience prefer coffee over everything else. It's okay, IT, I understand, no problem at all. Thank you very much for participating with me. All right, so today we are going to talk about locator strategies with Playwright, and my name is Renata. And I have a website testing with Renata if you want to take a look after. And I want to thank Applitools for the invitation. And it's really exciting to be here with you. I want to start off this webinar by bringing up some thoughts, okay? First thought is that when we start a new project, automation project, it's very common to kind of do whatever we did in the past for other projects, right? So how many of you, you can answer to yourself, have started an automation project using the same practices that you successfully used in the past for another project? It could be for a different team, for a different framework, for a different project. So have you ever done that before? Or you always like start everything fresh with new ideas? I think it's very common, at least for me, to like reuse practices that I kind of think they are the best for that project without overthinking it, right? And another thing is that how many of you have ever heard from a manager that automation is not reliable? Oh, we have an automation project, but it's not reliable. So the question, have you ever had to convince the leadership that the automation is a good thing to do? I had an experience recently at Meta, the former Facebook, where I was interviewing there, and the manager said, oh, I'm working on this project with more than 1,000 tests, but they don't work. So I don't believe in automation. This is very common in our daily basis, right? So what I want to bring up today is that as quality engineers are responsible for building that experience. And it's very important to understand the importance of creating a maintainable framework. And today, this talk is not about me or my experience. It's about you and what you build when you automate a test. And I'm not talking about a code, but I'm talking about the experience for the entire engineering team. What we are going to see today is that we are going to change the experience for the team and how we are going to create maintainable testing frameworks. And I want to invite you to join me on this journey and explore Playwright as a tool to help us with that. I'm going to show you 3 steps that you can create this amazing experience and provide this new amazing thing for your whole team. The first step is to, very simple, read the documentation. Here we are going to see do's and don't. And the first one, as I just mentioned, is read the doc. So as I mentioned, Playwright is a end-to-end testing framework that enables reliable testing for modern web applications. It supports Node.js with TypeScript and JavaScript, and also Python, Java, and .NET. The documentation is very complete, and today we are going to focus on a tiny part, which is the locators. Locators represent the elements on a web page, for example. So if you have a field or a button, through the automation framework, you need to interact with these elements. And we use locators for that. In Playwright, as you can see here, we have a few options. For example, page.get by role. By that, you are able to find an element on a page and then make an action on it. For example, click or type or select. And here are 7 other options. For example, get by text, get by label, get by placeholder, get by alt text, get by title, and get by test ID. Here, down below, you can see an example of how to use it. Page.get by label. username and field like as with John. In this case, we are finding an element on the page that has a label username, and we are filling it with the word John, and so on and so forth. Another example here is a button that you can use to get by role, and then perform a click on it. Of course, we also have some other locator options, and very largely known is the CSS and XPath, right? You can use page.locator and combine all these options as well. And as we are practicing our first step, the first step is to read the documentation. And we can see down here that CSS and XPath are not recommended because the DOM can often change, and this can result in non-resilient tests. So when I say read the documentation, means that it's important to understand how the framework works and what it suggests you to do so you can get the most out of it. In this case, for Playwright, they don't recommend to use CSS or XPath. Instead, they recommend to use the other locators we just saw in the previous slide. And one reason for doing that is that the locators they offer have an auto weighting functionality. What this does is when you do an action, for example, a button, it will wait for the element to be attached to the DOM, visible, stable, received events, and enable. So Selenium, for example, is very known for the need to add weights until the page is loaded so you can interact with an element. And Playwright does that automatically for us. So this is only one reason why we should try to use the other locators that it offers. Besides that, it also has a lot of best practices that's important to know. So again, you can get the most of the framework. Your tests are going to be more resilient, and they will be more maintainable. And of course, they will run faster too. So this first practice, best practices that I'm gonna bring up today is that we should test user visible behavior. What that means is that everything we see in the application is what we're supposed to be automating, okay? So instead of trying to deal with elements that are not visible or with information that are not visible, try to use whatever is visible on your page. That will make your tests easier to maintain and more performatic. Again, here is the locator best practices, and it recommends you to use the built-in locators, as we just saw. Here is a good example of how to use it. For example, get by role button, name submit. And here is a counter example, and an example that you should not use. Locator button and this CSS here. This will probably make your tests less maintainable, less reliable, and this will make it run faster and be more resilient. So in the documentation, you can find a lot of information about the best practices, and you can follow them as the framework recommends. Another best practices is to generate locators. Yes, Playwright has a code generator that we are going to see in a little bit that help you build those locators. Instead of going to the application and trying to inspect the elements, you can use this feature and will help you to build the test faster. So not only to run the test faster, but it will help your construction as well. And I can't forget to mention the AI, right? Nowadays, everything is AI, ChatGPT, Bard from Google, and etc. And I want to just bring for you a simple prompt that I created on ChatGPT and Bard, and we are going to evaluate the results together, okay? So I actually didn't think of any prompt engineering technique. I just asked a simple question. What are the locators' best practices recommended by Playwright's documentation? Let's take a look at the ChatGPT. So first of all is use unique attributes. Avoid use styling classes. Use data attributes. Avoid fragile XPath, and so on and so forth. So we can see that's kind of okay. It's not like exactly what we can find in the documentation, but it's kind of similar to what they offer. And what I want to highlight here is that although it's kind of similar, the first recommendation is use unique attributes with ID and data test ID. So this is not actually true. We just saw that Playwright recommends use data visible user-facing attributes rather than ID or data test ID that are not visible, right? And we don't see any of those recommendations here. So it's very important that when you're using AI, make sure to double check the responses because not always is going to be true. And the next answer is from Bard, Google Bard, and then it says use user-facing attributes. So this is closer to what the documentation recommend. The second one is avoid CSS and XPath, as we just saw. So this is closer. And also Bard has a newer database, right? So it's kind of closer to what it's in the documentation. But again, make sure you always go back to the documentation and use that as a source of truth. Moving forward, as we close the step 1, which is read the documentation, the don't associated to that is that don't assume you know the framework when you start using it or when you are continue to using it. They are in constant development and can change very often. Even today, I've learned something new from the Playwright's documentation. So it's very important to often check it out and make sure you are applying the best practices because they can become deprecated one day and can change and then come with new things every single day. Okay, let's go to the step 2. The step 2 is experiment and pay attention. This is a very practical step, and I'm gonna share my VS Code with you now, and we are gonna see 3 things. We are gonna see a demo of 3 different sites: Demo Applitools, Demo QA, and Sauce Demo, and we are gonna understand a little bit better about those locators. We are gonna test different locators and see if they bring us any different results in terms of performance, for example. And we are also going to explore those same locators running in the visual regression tests with Applitools and see if they actually impact in anything in there. So I'm going to switch to my VS Code, and I hope you can see it now. Okay, here is a demo that I created. You can find the GitHub repo in the resources section, as Pam mentioned. And I created 3 different files for 3 different websites. The first one is demo.applitools.com. The second one is demoqa.com. And the third one is saucedemo.com. Those websites are just signing applications. I mean, they do something else, but we are going to explore just the signing. So this is the first one, Demo QA. This is the Applitools one. Let me just go back to the signing page real quick, which is this one. So we have a username, password, and signing button. And this is the third one, again, username, password, and signing button. Commonly, we go to the browser, right? And the first thing we do is to inspect the elements. Let's go and see this one here. The first thing we learned from the documentation is to use visible user-facing attributes. Here we can see that we have a label username. We have a hint called placeholder, enter your username, and also a password and enter your password. So ideally, we should use the enter your username placeholder as the locator for this test. And for the signing button, we can use the text itself. If we inspect the element, we will see these attributes that I just mentioned right here. So we have an ID, username, and we have a placeholder. And it's the same for all the other websites. And this is exactly what I implemented here. Okay. We have the base URL open in the browser, the page itself, because the browser is opened by Playwright automatically. We have the get by placeholder for the username, and then we fill it with the username. Then the get by placeholder again for the password, fill it with the password, and then get by role, clicking at the link with the text or the name signing. And then I perform an assert, checking if the URL is the URL that I expected. And then I implemented the same test, replacing the get by placeholder by the locator, which is not super recommended by Playwright, right? However, here you can use a ID with the hashtag, or you could use dot for a CSS class, for example, or the XPath. I did the same for the demo QA. Exactly the same thing. However, the placeholders are a little bit different, and the locator's ID locator is different too. And for this last one, sauce demos, I was also able to use the data test ID, which is another largely used attribute that the engineering team, the developers can add to the locators, and it also makes it more reliable. So here it is. Playwright actually recommends using that too, and it has a locator, a built-in locator for that, which is the get by test ID. Important to mention here that Playwright automatically identifies a few common names, for example, data tests or data test ID. But in this case, for this website specifically, it doesn't have any of those attributes. So I have to add a parameter here in the Playwright config file saying the data test name that we are going to use for the tests. Just this single line will make all the tests work. And later, we have also implemented the same thing using Applitools as a visual regression testing tool. Applitools is very complete, so it will run the test, take screenshots, and compare with a baseline that you can easily maintain throughout your tests. The test is basically the same as we can see down here, but we have to initiate the eyes, which is the object that Applitools uses to actually start the runner. And we do an eyes.check that will actually take the screenshot for us. It works with different targets. So you can say if you want a precise screenshot, like pixel perfect, or if you have room for a few changes. For example, if the content changes, like e-commerce applications that can change the products from time to time, it will just check the layout. This is how you do it. And Applitools has many other options. You can check only one region. You can ignore some regions. So it's very, very complete. And when it comes to the test itself, we are using the same locators, and we are going to explore the results in performance of those two tests, as we can call it that. I think that's it for now. You can run the test by typing, let me see. Yeah, you can run the test by typing npx playwright tests and passing the test folder here for the first tests, these folder tests. Or if you want to run the visual regression tests, you can do npx playwright tests and then pass the Applitools tests folder as well. It has other parameters, but today we are going to focus only on these two. Back to the presentation, let's explore the results. First, let me explain to you what I did. I ran the test 5 times for each file, and I measured how much it took to run the tests, okay? So for that first website, Demo Applitools, using the placeholder locator, which is recommended by Playwright, the first test took 786 milliseconds. While when we ran against the same website using the ID, it took 792 milliseconds. So actually, I intended to highlight here the one that ran faster, and I made a mistake that was supposed to be this one instead of this one. But you can see here the other results that placeholder actually finished 3 times faster than the ID. Important to mention here as well that this is a very small amount of tests. And the idea here is not to actually give a conclusion, oh, this locator is better than the other one, but to understand the variation between them and make you explore that on your project and see what makes the most sense for your application, okay? The second example is the demo QA, again, using the placeholder and the ID as well. And here we can see that the ID performed better than the placeholder, okay? ID is not recommended by Playwright, but instead they would recommend it to use data ID if possible. And the third example is the only one that actually had the data test ID, the source demo website. And we can actually confirm that assumption that the tests run way faster using those locators. I'm saying way faster because if you observe this first one, it's kind of half of the time, right? And imagine in a suite with more than 1,000 tests. So it was very interesting to do this experiment and see those results because personally, I didn't know myself if that was true or not. And here I have a comparison between the times. I kind of took the fastest and the slowest. The greater sign here means that it takes the longest time to run, X times 1,000, just to mimic if we had 1,000 tests running parallel, not considering the parallelization, how many minutes it would take to complete the suite. So in this case, the slowest one would take 20 minutes and the fastest one would take 12 minutes using different locators. So it's something to think about, right, when you are implementing a test, because maybe you think that milliseconds or seconds won't impact that much, but at the end, they will impact. And the most impressive here, I mean, they are all pretty similar. This one also with 25 minutes and this one with 12 minutes. I also have results in Safari and Firefox. We can see here that some of them took the same time. And although we don't need to explore these results deeply, I want to mention that the speed also changes between browsers. So it's important to keep that in mind and evaluate that in your suite as well. And this is the results for the Firefox. And here is the first time that I actually saw that the data test ID is not consistently faster than the other locators. But even though when it's not the same, it's very, very close. Okay, going to the visual regression tests. Here are the results for the Applitools tests. We can see that it ran a little bit slower, of course, because it takes a screenshot, uploads the images to the server, and do the comparison for you over there. But here we kind of have pretty similar results, right? Most of the tests ran within the same time frame. The only difference were these two, and they were pretty close as well. For the demo QA, same thing, pretty similar results. And for the source demo, they also consistently shown that data test ID was faster than the other tests. So something to keep in mind, and maybe explore this option with your engineering team if makes sense to you. Otherwise, maybe try the other locators that are available at Playwright. So closing up step 2, the don't is don't ignore the fact that the locator we choose will impact the test speed and reliability of your project. So keep that in mind. And when someone complains about the pipeline taking too long, think if that makes sense to explore in your project. Of course, this is not the top priority. Sometimes we don't even have time to implement tests, but if you have a more or less mature framework, maybe you can explore that as well, or maybe create a task to do that once per year, once per quarter. I don't know, just bringing it up, giving the idea to you. Step 3, use the framework features. So we saw in the best practices that Playwright offers a lot of features like the code generator, the UI mode, the trace viewer. So this is what we are going to see now. Okay, here we have 4 items. First, we are going to see the code generator. Second, we are going to see the UI mode. Third, the VS Code extension. And fourth, the trace viewer. Let's go again to the VS Code. All right, I'm going to open my terminal here. And as I mentioned, the first one is the code generator. The way you start it is by typing npx playwright code gen and the website you're going to target. Oh, let me just enable no, never mind. It's fine. So by typing this, the code generator will open up with a browser instance and the code generator right beside it. I hope you can see it. Let me rearrange it real quick. All right. So it already added the import that is mandatory for every Playwright test. You can see here the red icon saying record. It means that the test is being recorded. It added the test, which is the standard test for your test cases, and already added the page.go-to that opens the page you want to test. Next, you go to the application that opened here, and you do whatever you need to do. For example, I just clicked at the field, and I'm going to type test as my username, and I'm going to type password as my password, and click on the sign in button. And you can see here that it recorded every action that I did on this website. Of course, if you want to click at links, or maybe, I don't know, if you have a drop down, etc., it can do that for you. And you can just copy the test and paste it on your VS Code or whichever IDE you prefer to use. You can see here that it prioritizes the built-in locators, get by placeholder, get by role. This way is super easy to do. For some locators, as we can see here, it can't identify in a very nice way, so it will use the non-recommended option too. And the conclusion we get from that is that the non-recommended doesn't mean that it's not possible to use, it's forbidden to use, it's just not recommended. And it may cause flakiness or slowness on your tests. The nice thing about this code generator is that you can switch between languages pretty easily. So we just recorded in TypeScript, we can easily change it to Python, for example. So if you forget to change that in the beginning, you can do that later, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty neat, in my opinion. That's pretty much what you can do here. You can just record, copy, and paste into your IDE. So although it's pretty nice, it's not personally something that I use every day. Let's go to the next, which is the UI mode. So you can trigger the UI mode by typing npx playwright test and -- UI. As you type that, something pretty similar is going to open up. If you're familiar with Playwright, as we saw that we have many people here that have played with Playwright before, you will recognize this UI mode. It's kind of the tracer that we have for the reports. And here is a list of all the tests existing in your test suite. You can perform some filters here, and you can run the test. So I'm going to run, for example, this demo Applitools by clicking at the play button. Oh, by the way, if you click at the test, it will pop up here for you. You can play and it will run. Okay, it already passed. And the nice thing is that, let me see if I can see the timeline here. Okay, so because we have two tests inside the test file, we need to select the test that we want to see. And it shows a timeline here of each step that happened inside the test. It's pretty nice. And as you select the step actions, okay, as you select the actions here, for example, fill the field, you can see what happens in each state of the page. Let's say, for example, you picked the wrong locator for this test. We can even click here at pick locator and mouse over, and it will show the locator that Playwright recommends to use for each field. So you can update your test by copying this locator easily, and you go to your IDE and update it, or you can simply see that you're missing something. Here, of course, you have the network tab, with every network action, and you can also see the response for everything. If there was a real API call here, we would be able to see the request and the response. So everything pretty complete. And you can filter here as well. And also another pretty nice feature that Playwright offers. And again, personally, that's not something that I love the most, because the next one that I'm going to show you is the VS Code extension. You can access it through this icon here, of course, after you install it. So first you need to go to the extension and search for Playwright Test for VS Code and install it. And as you do that, you're going to see this icon here. So we just saw something similar to that on the UI mode, right? But here you can actually see the test and edit live. So you don't need to copy and paste anything. You can just run the test, you can debug the test, everything within the IDE. So you're ready to do it right there. And in case you need to, for example, let's say you are implementing a test and you need to pick the locator, you can use, for example, the pick the locator functionality right here. It will open a browser. You will need to paste the URL there. And it will pop up here, hopefully. Let's see. Yeah, so the locator is here, available for you. If you want to accept it, you press enter. And then you can paste it here. This way, it copies only the locator. And we just saw here that it didn't use the recommended one, get by test ID, for example. We just used the locator itself. So you can use those functionalities to help you, or you could even use the whole record new test by just clicking at that and going to the URL. Sorry, let me copy. Let me get this one, for example, Applitools. And then you do test, password, signing, and then it generates, let's see what happened. Did I use the right locator? Okay, let's try one more time. Sorry about it. may have done something wrong. Record new, and then paste it. Okay, maybe switching between files, break. And then you hit signing, and then you have your test recorded in your IDE already. Okay, another thing you can do is the record at cursor, that if you are implementing a test, you can do record at cursor inside the test file, and it will add the steps that you do right there. Another very nice thing we can do here, let me actually force an error so we can see the trace viewer. I'm gonna change this username here for something not correct and run the test, entire test. We'll see what happened. Demo Applitools. Maybe it's not case sensitive. Let me try and say here. Save and run it one more time. Okay, I think it's gonna break now. It has a big timeout, that's why it's taking a little bit, but it's gonna be worth it, I promise. Okay, cool. It errors out here for us so we can see what happened. And if you see here, probably it didn't, but we can open the test results by typing on our terminal npx playwright show report, I think. Yes. Oh, and because I ran there, it doesn't show. Hold on a second. Sorry about it. Let's see if this way works. I'm gonna restart and run it one more time. Okay, this is not actually what I was looking for. Sorry about it, but you can see the trace viewer here one more time, and you can navigate. I think the test is still running. That's why it's blank right now. You should have decreased the timeout. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, let me actually run the test on the terminal. This is what I actually wanted to show you guys. I'm gonna close this and clean this, go to my terminal and type npx playwright tests slash. This way we are gonna run the test under the folder tests, and one of the tests is gonna fail as we just broke it. And I'm gonna show you the report that comes also built in on Playwright, and you don't need to install anything special for that. As soon as you run the test and it finishes, bear with me, people. Live coding is always challenging. Okay, we saw the error here in our console, and at the end, it's gonna open the report. Cool, exactly what we wanted. So you can set up to open it by default on failures or always or never. In this case, it's set to open every time I run the test via command line. And we can see here all the test results. By browser, you can filter the ones that are failed or flaky or skipped. Let's evaluate this one, for example. Here you see the error that threw out on the console. So you see that this page closed, waiting for get role and with this name, and it didn't find the element. Here you can see exactly the action that failed. If you want to expand it, you see the option one more time. And the most cool thing, in my opinion, is the trace. If you click here, again, we already saw that, but you can see exactly which one failed. And you can go before and after each action, see what's going on there, and go and pick the locator that you want. So exactly the same thing that I showed with the UI mode and the VS Code extension. But this is, in my opinion, easier to use because I like command line a lot. So it helps me out. I'm very productive with this way. So if you go back to the VS Code, you can easily fix the locator, and then your test will run normally later on. I think in this VS Code extension, that's it. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything for this part. Okay, record new, record. Yeah, so we saw everything. We are ready to go back to the presentation. The step 3, we close with the don't. So don't forget to update the framework regularly to continue to benefit from its features. Those features are in constant development, so it's important that you keep your Playwright version up to date so you can get the latest updates. So don't forget to do that regularly. Just to recap everything we saw, the do's for this framework that I'm offering you to do to change the experience of your engineering team by creating maintainable frameworks is, first, read the doc. Second, experiment and pay attention, where we saw the difference in performance for each locator we chose. And third, use the framework features because it will help you to build faster and more reliable frameworks too. Don't assume you know the framework, so always check the documentation. Don't ignore the fact that the locator you choose will impact the test speed and reliability. It's our responsibility to create reliable and maintainable frameworks. And last, don't forget to update your framework regularly so you can get the most out of its features. And with that, I finished the presentation. We can go back to the questions. And thank you very much for being here with me. Obrigado in Portuguese. And let's see what we have.
Thank you, Renata, for that presentation. There's so many great comments. There are a lot of questions
Cool.
over there. So early on, Ritesh Kumar asked, I wanted to understand locator strategy for dynamic fields on the page, like a field inside the grid. This was our most upvoted question.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm assuming if you are looking for a specific element, for example, that has a text, I have recently implemented a sort option, for example, where I had to check if an element with a text would be at the second position. In that scenario, if that's what was asked, you need to combine the text and the locator CSS for that, the expat in some cases. So again, although it's not recommended to use expats and CSS locators, sometimes that's what we need to use. I think I have an example for that at the Test Automation Advanced course. I'm not sure. And I can maybe if you want to ping me on LinkedIn, I can point you exactly to that position, to that example, which is what we have to do.
There is a link to the Playwright learning path on TAU on the resources tab, and I've just put it in here in the chat as well, so you can get started there also.
Perfect.
Okay, the next question is from Ashrith. How to handle React Native drop-down viewport in Playwright?
Okay, and unfortunately, I'm not familiar with React Native, so I will need to research on that and get back to you, folks, if you don't mind.
All right, our next question from Swapnil. How could cookies be handled in Playwright?
Okay, so you're saying that you need to set a cookie and then maybe do an action on your page, reload the page. Let me think. I also think I have an example of that. Let me see real quick here if I can say something. Yeah, on the advanced test, I think I mentioned something about that. 1 second, guys. I'm opening the code here so I can remember. CD documents.
As I mentioned at the top of the hour, Renata is very curious and very generous with her time. She wants to make you get answers.
Yes, of course. So, yeah, I don't have an example of that on our Test Automation University Advanced course, but at the documentation, just found out that the browser context, you can do a new context, you can add cookies there. There is a method called add cookies, and probably that will help you with that. I can post the link in the chat as well for that. Here you go.
All right. So we have some additional questions. I'm going to work through these. John asks, does Playwright have a corresponding interface for testing native mobile apps?
Great question. So I got to know that recently that Playwright is focused on web applications. However, it has an Android beta version. So it's not fully released yet. It's still in test, but in the documentation, you can also find out about that. Just search mobile there and you'll find out how to use it. I know that many people are using robot framework with Playwright. So it's a recommendation for web applications that it's very often used. Mobile applications, I mean.
Okay, I'm going to jump through a couple of these. Brian asked, what are the best practices for using which locators on elements like text, fields, and buttons?
Good question. Thank you, Brian. So this is exactly what we saw on that first locators document page of Playwright. So it has 7 built-in locators, and those are the most recommended ones. So that works for fields, for buttons, for everything. And in case that's not enough for your application, you can also use the dot locator too.
Excellent. Right. Stephen asked, how much of a reliability trade-off do you see with using get by role versus get by test ID?
Good question. Thank you, Stephen. In terms of reliability, it really depends on your project. So if you have a team, a development team, or your team that has access to the code and can easily add data test IDs, perfect, go with that. But if not, you have to go with another option. But in terms of reliability, they are very, very similar unless your application changes the elements a lot. In case of A/B testing, for example, you can also control that via cookies, as we had a previous question today, and create parameterized tests based on the A/B test experiments that you have on your application.
Okay. John has a question. Is there a way to tell Playwright that it should fail fast if it does not find a control? For example, if I get to the username, the password, and login controls should already be there. If they are not, it should fail faster.
Yes, you can control your timeouts on the Playwright config. By default, I think it's 5 seconds, but you can always change that. And you can also manipulate that inside the test itself. So in case it's a very recurrent issue on your tests, you can add a forced failure inside that. Let me quickly, I can get back to you, but you can definitely do that inside the test itself with a first command.
Okay. All right. This one is liable to be quite controversial. Tracy asks, do you recommend using page objects with Playwright?
That's a great question. I'm about to release an article about that because it's a very often question. And my personal opinion is that it depends, right? I have experiences with projects that were so small, so simple that creating a page object would increase another file. It would increase a file to maintain, to write, and it wasn't worth it. But most of the projects that I've used, page objects was made the test easier. My recommendation is to decide which technique you are going to use. Don't mix both of them in a project. If you decide to use page objects and you have a few cases of it's unnecessary, just stick with that technique so you don't make a mess on your code. You have standards and all the team is aware of that. You don't need to transfer that decision for the test engineer. So as long as it's decided if you're going with or without, just stick with that decision.
Okay. All right. I think we have time for maybe one additional question. Let's see. Doriel asked, when using the recorder, does it work with TypeScript and add types?
The recorded is more for actions. So it's usually we don't need to create variables during the test steps. If you want to create extra functions for reusability, you would need to do that manually. So it doesn't provide that feature just because the actions don't have that itself.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that is all the time that we have for questions today. But Renata, I will share the questions with you. And Renata is on all the social medias, and a link to her website is on the resources tab, so be sure to reach out to her. Additionally, as I mentioned, she has 2 fantastic courses on Test Automation University that have examples for many of these items there. So Applitools is on a mission to reinvent every step of the testing process. We are the pioneer and leader in AI-powered automation testing. Our solutions work with dozens of leading tools and frameworks. And if you want to see it in action with your tech stack, schedule a call with one of our testing specialists. They're ready to help. There's a link in the resources tab and at the top of the chat, or you can just get in touch at applitools.info/TDZ. There's also a special link where you can try Applitools yourself with a free account. You can claim yours today. Again, thank you for joining. Renata, thank you for a great presentation.
Thank you, Pen. Thank you, everyone. It was super fun. See you later.